Imagine a car so brutally powerful that Chevrolet themselves refused to warranty it. A machine so far beyond factory specs that it turned gas stations into impromptu drag strips and scared Porsche owners into taking the long way home. This wasn't just another muscle car. This was the Yenko Super Camaro, a name that still sends chills down the spines of gearheads 4 decades later. In the late 1960s, while most Americans were content with 300 horsepower V8s, legendary dealer tuner Don Yenko looked at Chevy's SS Camaro and said, "Not enough." What followed was automotive heresy. A street-legal Camaro with a 427 cubic inch L72 big block V8, factory rated at 425 horsepower, but rumored to push well over 450. This wasn't a bolt-on tuner special. Yenko ripped out the stock engine, reinforced the frame, upgraded the suspension, and installed a Muncie M22 rock crusher transmission built to handle the torque of a freight train. The result? A car that could run low 12s in the quarter mile. In 1969. To put that in perspective, a brand new 2024 Mustang GT needs a supercharger just to match that performance. But raw speed wasn't the only thing that made the Yenko legendary. It was the rebellion behind it. GM's corporate overlords had strict rules about engine swaps, but Yenko exploited a loophole. He ordered base model Camaros, then rebuilt them as fire-breathing monsters before they even hit the showroom floor. Buyers didn't just get a car, they got a certificate of insanity, a promise that their Camaro could outrun anything short of a jet. And outrun they did. Stories of Yenko Camaros humiliating Ferraris, outgunning Hemis, and even terrifying unsuspecting Corvette owners became the stuff of legend. Yet, despite its dominance, fewer than 200 Yenko Super Camaros were ever built, making them rarer than a blue moon today. So why did this king of muscle cars fade into obscurity? Blame the oil crisis, tightening emissions laws, and the simple fact that the world wasn't ready for a car this unhinged. But for those who remember, or better yet, those who've heard the earth-shaking idol of a Yenko 427, this Camaro remains the ultimate what-if of American muscle. And that's why even now, spotting one at a car show isn't just a nostalgia trip, it's a religious experience. Let's talk about a car so deceptive, so utterly unassuming, that it became the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing. The Nickey Chicago 427 Nova SS. Picture this. The year is 1969. The streets are dominated by flashy GTOs, snarling Hemi Cudas, and Shelby Mustangs turning heads at every stoplight. Then there's this thing. A plain Jane Chevy Nova, the kind your math teacher might have driven, with its boxy silhouette and zero visual drama. But pop the hood and pure pandemonium awaits. A 427 cubic inch big block V8, the same engine that powered Corvettes to glory, now crammed into a car that weighed less than a modern Honda Civic. This wasn't just a muscle car. This was a factory-backed assassination machine built by Nickey Chevrolet, the same madman who turned Camaros into Corvette killers. The genius of the Nickey Nova wasn't just in its speed, though make no mistake, with 425-plus horsepower and a quarter-mile time in the mid-11s, it could embarrass cars costing 3 times as much. But in its sheer invisibility, cops ignored it. Racers underestimated it. And then it would absolutely demolish them. The Nova's lightweight body, combined with that nuclear-powered big block, made it a drag strip terror that could launch so hard it'd snap half-shafts like toothpicks. Nickey didn't just build fast cars, they built psychological warfare on wheels. The real kicker? These weren't garage-built oddities, they were sold through dealerships, with full warranties, at least on the parts Chevy actually made. Only a handful were ever produced, and most were raced into oblivion, their engines swapped, their bodies rusted, their legends fading into obscurity. Today, a real Nickey Nova is one of the rarest muscle cars in existence, a ghost from an era when speed wasn't about badges or marketing. It was about raw, unapologetic displacement. And that's why, when you hear the thunderous idol of a 427 Nova rumbling at a car show, you don't just look, you stop. You listen. And you remember, this is what happens when engineers stop following rules and start rewriting them. Let me tell you about the black sheep of the muscle car family, the 1969 Hearst/Olds, a car so brutally effective it scared General Motors into canceling it. This wasn't just another factory hot rod. This was a corporate mutiny on wheels, a clandestine operation where aftermarket legend George Hurst and a renegade group of Oldsmobile engineers secretly built a drag strip Predator in direct violation of GM's engine size restrictions. While GM executives were busy enforcing a 400 cubic inch limit, Hurst was stuffing Oldsmobile's forbidden 455 rocket V8 into the lightweight Cutlass body, creating what enthusiasts quickly dubbed the Hairy Olds for its tendency to leave competitors eating its dust. We're talking about a car that could run high 12s straight off the showroom floor in 1969, with enough torque to twist its own frame if you weren't careful. The Hurst/Olds didn't just break rules, it obliterated them, featuring a pistol grip shifter that looked like it belonged in a fighter jet and enough gold trim to make a rapper jealous. But what really set this car apart was its Jekyll and Hyde personality, docile enough for Sunday drives, yet capable of transforming into a quarter-mile assassin with just a heavy right foot. The factory even included a Hurst Lightning kit with extra carb jets and ignition parts, basically giving owners a license to turn their street car into a weekend dragster. Today, these rebellious machines are worth small fortunes, not just because they're rare, only 913 were made, but because they represent the last gasp of unapologetic horsepower before the insurance companies and government regulators ruined the party. When you hear that distinctive Oldsmobile Rocket V8 Lope, part muscle car, part luxury cruiser, you're hearing the sound of corporate defiance, a middle finger to the establishment that still echoes through car culture today. That's why when a real 69 Hurst/Olds shows up at a meet, it doesn't just draw crowds. It starts arguments about whether this was the most underrated muscle car of all time. And that's exactly how George Hurst would have wanted it. Picture this. It's 1970, and while every gearhead is drooling over Chevelles, Mustangs, and Chargers, there's an underdog lurking in the shadows. The AMC Rebel the Machine, a car so unexpectedly vicious, it made the big three automakers spill their morning coffee. This wasn't just another muscle car trying to play catch-up. This was American Motors' declaration of war, a blue-collar hero packing a 390 cubic inch V8 that could go toe-to-toe with anything from Detroit's elite. What made the machine so special wasn't just its power, though with 340 horsepower and tire-melting 430 lb-ft of torque it had plenty, but its shock value. AMC, the smallest of the American automakers, built a car that could run neck and neck with a 426 Hemi for thousands less, wrapped in one of the most outrageous color schemes in muscle car history, white with patriotic red, white, and blue stripes that looked like they'd been applied by a madman with a paint roller. The Rebel machine didn't just perform, it made a statement, with a hood scoop big enough to swallow small animals, and a stance that screamed, "Try me." But here's where the story gets really interesting. AMC knew they couldn't outspend the competition, so they outsmarted them. They offered a Go package that included a dealer-installed ram air induction system, special suspension, and enough attitude to make up for their smaller dealership network. The result? A car that could embarrass much more expensive metal on the street and the strip, with a personality as brash as its paint job. Today, these Rebels are among the rarest and most sought-after muscle cars, not just because fewer than 2,000 were made, but because they represent the ultimate David versus Goliath story in automotive history. When you hear that deep rumbling AMC V8 note, distinct from the Chevy, Ford, and Mopar engines of the era, you're hearing the sound of the little guy who refused to back down. That's why when a real Rebel machine shows up at a car show today, it doesn't just turn heads. It starts conversations about how sometimes the best muscle cars didn't come from the usual suspects. And that's exactly why this forgotten titan deserves its place among the legends. Let me introduce you to the automotive equivalent of a raging bull that even its creators couldn't fully control. The 1969 Shelby GT 500 Super Snake. This wasn't just another fast Mustang. This was Carroll Shelby's personal fever dream, a street-legal terror packing a 428 cubic inch Cobra Jet V8 force-fed by not one, but two massive Paxton superchargers, creating enough horsepower to make contemporary Ferraris blush, estimated at over 500 horsepower, when most supercars struggled to break 300. Imagine a car so brutally powerful that Shelby himself reportedly said it scared him. A man who raced 200 miles per hour at Le Mans without breaking a sweat. The Super Snake wasn't built to compete, it was built to dominate. with a 0 to 60 time under 5 seconds in an era when 7 seconds was considered quick, and a quarter-mile performance that could humble modern sports cars. But here's the kicker. This mechanical insanity wasn't some back-alley tuner special. It came with a factory warranty, or what passed for one in 1969, complete with Shelby serial numbers and that iconic Cobra badging. The story goes that Shelby intended this as a prototype for a new production line, but after test drives left even professional drivers white-knuckled, the project was shelved, leaving only one complete example ever built: Carroll's personal car. What makes the Super Snake truly legendary isn't just its numbers, though they're staggering, but what it represents: the absolute zenith of American muscle car excess, a time when engineers would strap absurd power into production cars just to see what would happen. Today, that single surviving Super Snake is worth millions, not just for its rarity, but as a rolling monument to a bygone era when horsepower reigned supreme and safety was an afterthought. When you hear the distinctive whine of those twin superchargers over the thunderous V8 exhaust note, you're not just hearing a car. You're hearing the unmuffled roar of unchecked automotive ambition. That's why when this unicorn appears at shows, it doesn't just draw crowds, it creates pilgrimages, with enthusiasts traveling hundreds of miles just to glimpse the muscle car that was simply too much for its own time. And that's exactly why the Super Snake remains the ultimate what could have been in muscle car history. Picture this: a car so brutally effective on the racetrack that it got banned from competition before it could claim its rightful throne. The 1970 Plymouth Cuda AR All-American Racers. This wasn't just another pretty face in the muscle car crowd. This was Chrysler's secret weapon, a street-legal version of their Trans Am racer, packing a 340 cubic inch V8 with triple carburetors that howled like a banshee at 7,000 RPM. While everyone else was obsessed with big blocks, Plymouth engineers worked black magic on this small block, creating an engine so responsive it could out-rev a Ferrari Dino and out-handle most European sports cars of its day. The AAR Cuda came straight from the factory with racing suspension, massive front disc brakes, and a ducktail spoiler that wasn't just for show. It actually kept this beast planted at speeds that would make lesser muscle cars nervous. But here's what really set it apart: that glorious side exit exhaust system that dumped raw engine noise right behind the front wheels, creating a symphony of mechanical fury that could wake the dead. These cars were so track-focused that Plymouth included an engine oil cooler from the factory, something unheard of in street cars at the time. The AAR Cuda was built to homologate Plymouth's Trans Am racer, but in a cruel twist of fate, Chrysler pulled out of the series before the competition really heated up, leaving these street versions as the only reminder of what might have been. Today, they're the rarest of the rare. Only about 2,724 were made, and the few survivors command prices that would make a Hemi Cuda blush. When you hear an AAR Cuda coming down the road, that distinctive side pipe roar tells you everything. This wasn't built for posing at cruise nights. This was built to dominate. And that's why when one shows up at a muscle car gathering today, real enthusiasts don't just look, they bow. Because the AAR Cuda represents the ultimate racer's choice, a car that proves sometimes the most exciting muscle didn't come from the biggest engine, but from the craziest engineers. Let me tell you about the muscle car world's best-kept secret, the 1971 Buick GSX Stage 1, the last true king of American horsepower before the insurance companies and emissions regulations ruined the party. While everyone was busy drooling over Hemi Cudas and LS6 Chevelles, Buick quietly built what might be the most underrated muscle car of all time. A luxury brawler packing a 455 cubic inch V8 that made more torque than a freight train, 510 lb-ft to be exact. This wasn't just another fast car. This was the automotive equivalent of a sniper rifle, precise, devastatingly effective, and completely unexpected from a brand known for catering to grandparents. The GSX Stage 1 secret weapon was its massive torque curve that came on like a tidal wave at just 2,800 RPM, meaning it could launch harder off the line than cars with 100 more horsepower. Buick engineers achieved this through black magic, huge ports, radical cam timing, and an intake system that gulped air like it was going out of style. The result? A car that could run mid-13ths in the quarter mile while coddling you in plush bucket seats with enough sound deadening to hear the stereo over the tire smoke. But here's what really makes the GSX Stage 1 special. It arrived right as the muscle car era was collapsing, making it both the swan song and arguably the most refined expression of Detroit horsepower. Only 124 were built in 1971, each wearing the GSX's signature Apollo white paint with bold hood stripes that looked like war paint. Today, these Buicks are the holy grail for collectors who know the truth, that in real-world street driving, a well-driven GSX Stage 1 could humble nearly anything on the road. When you hear that deep, mellow Buick V8 rumble, distinct from the sharper crack of a Chevy or the animalistic roar of a Hemi, you're hearing the sound of a company that took everyone by surprise. That's why, when a real GSX Stage 1 rolls into a car show today, the true muscle car experts stop talking and start paying attention. Because this isn't just another classic. It's proof that sometimes, the baddest car on the street doesn't need to shout about it. Let's talk about the muscle car that shouldn't have existed. The 1969 Boss 429 Mustang, a street-legal NASCAR engine stuffed into a production car so aggressively that Ford had to fake the VIN numbers to get it past corporate. This wasn't just a fast Mustang. This was a factory-approved felony. A car so radical that Ford's own engineers called it borderline undrivable on the street. The reason? That monstrous 429 cubic inch semi-Hemi V8, an engine designed for one purpose: to dominate NASCAR at 200 miles per hour. But to meet homologation rules, Ford had to build at least 500 street versions. So they took their Le Mans winning powerhouse and somehow crammed it between the fenders of a Mustang. The result? A car that idled like a nervous wreck thanks to its racing cam and guzzled gas like a jet fighter. But when those 7,350 RPM secondaries kicked in, it sounded like the apocalypse. The Boss 429 wasn't just powerful. It was savagely over-engineered, with a forged steel crankshaft, aluminum heads, and valves so large they had to offset the spark plugs just to fit them. Yet for all its track-bred insanity, Ford marketed it as a highway cruiser to avoid alarming insurance companies. That's like selling a flamethrower as a patio heater. On paper, it was rated at 375 horsepower. A joke, considering dyno tests showed it made closer to 500 plus. But here's the twist. The Boss 429 was terrible at drag racing. All that NASCAR tech meant it made power at stratospheric RPMs, while Chevelles and Hemis crushed it off the line. Where it did dominate, the open road. Above 80 miles per hour, this thing was a missile, pulling harder than anything Detroit had ever unleashed. Today, fewer than 1,400 survive, and when one fires up, that loping, uneven idle, courtesy of its racing cam, tells you everything. This wasn't built for stoplight races. It was built to break rules. And that's why, when a real Boss 429 rumbles into a car show, it doesn't just turn heads, it rewrites history. Let's talk about the ultimate cautionary tale of American muscle. The 1970 Plymouth Superbird, a car so audaciously fast that it literally scared NASCAR into banning it. This wasn't just a winged wonder. This was Detroit's space-age answer to going 200 miles per hour before stability control existed, a car born from one simple commandment: win at all costs. That iconic 18-inch tall aluminum wing wasn't for show. It generated enough downforce at speed to plant the rear tires like God's own hand, while that pointed nose cone reduced drag so effectively that drivers reported the steering going light at 170 miles per hour. Underneath that outrageous body lived the legendary 426 Hemi, making 425 horsepower on paper, but closer to 500 in reality. Enough to push the Superbird past 200 miles per hour on NASCAR ovals. But here's what makes the Superbird truly special. It was too successful for its own good. After Richard Petty used one to dominate the 1970 season, NASCAR panicked and changed the rules, requiring manufacturers to sell 3,000 street versions to compete, a death sentence for what was essentially a race car with tags. Plymouth managed to build exactly 1,935 street-legal Superbirds, many of which sat unsold on dealer lots for years because nobody knew what to do with a street car that wanted to live at 150 miles per hour. Today, these winged warriors are worth fortunes, not just because they're rare, but because they represent the absolute peak of Detroit's horsepower wars, a time when engineers would literally bolt a wing from a fighter jet onto a family sedan just to go faster. When you hear a Superbird's Hemi fire up, that deep, resonant idle isn't just engine noise. It's the sound of American automakers giving the middle finger to physics, common sense, and anyone who said you can't do that. And that's why when one shows up at auction today, seven-figure prices aren't just paying for a car. They're buying a piece of the moment when Detroit proved it could out-engineer anyone. Consequences be damned.